is both his exoneration and his failure. And it's one of the most extraordinary ironies of British history that Cromwell's protectorate, demonised by both royalists and republicans alike, ultimately formed the blueprint for our constitutional monarchy. A chief executive who chose his government, but who were both answerable to a regularly elected parliament. But Cromwell himself would not live to see this happen. On September the 3rd, 1658, the anniversary of the Battle of Worcester, Cromwell died while an immense black tempest was raging over England, ripping out trees and sending belfries crashing to the ground. It was, the old wives said, the devil coming for his soul. What Oliver Cromwell left behind was not a workable political system, but a vision. Now, he may have been an angry, ruthless, overbearing man, perhaps even a manic depressive. But that vision was something of startling sweetness, a sighting of Jerusalem, a place where everyone would be free to receive Christ in their own way, provided that they did not disturb the peace and conscience of anybody else. After all his marches and slaughters and fits of table-pounding, red-faced fury, what it turned out Oliver Cromwell wanted for everyone was a quiet life. But Catholics were excluded from this vision, because for Cromwell, as for the country at large, Catholicism meant tyranny. The Protector may have left the country safe from despots, but not from anarchy. And after his death, it returned with a vengeance. Power swinging between the soldiers and the politicians, sleepless nights, the nagging questions from 10 years before. Who will keep us safe? Who do we obey? Where do we find a sovereign to protect us? It took another hard-headed soldier to see the only way to restore order. General George Monk had been a royalist in the Civil War and a Cromwellian when it seemed that only the Protector could keep the peace. Now he realised that with the Lord Protector gone, there was only one person who could take his place. That was a new king. The irony about the restoration of Charles II was that he came to the throne not because England needed a successor to Charles I. He came to the throne because England needed a successor to Oliver Cromwell. There was universal rejoicing, bonfires and feasting. The chaos brought by Cromwell's death was ending, and this new Charles seemed just what everyone had hoped for, a model of sweet reason. That, at any rate, is what Samuel Pepys thought. Pepys was a pure product of Cromwell's England. He was present when the new king boarded his flagship home. En route, the tall, dark-haired man strode up and down the quarterdeck, telling the story of his escape after the Battle of Worcester. Here was a king full of charisma. He had magic. But would his reason survive the emotions stirred by his return? The diarist John Evelyn recorded with unrepentant royalism burning in his breast.
This day came in his majesty to London, after a sad and long exile, with a triumph of above 20,000 horse and foot, brandishing their swords and shouting with inexpressible joy, the ways strewn with flowers, the bells ringing. I stood in the Strand and beheld it and blessed God. And all this without one drop of blood, and by that very army which had rebelled against him.
The king was crowned at Westminster on the 23rd of April, 1661. His reign was backdated to the day after his father had been beheaded. But even before the king had been crowned, there were those with long memories who were looking for revenge. On January the 30th, 1661, exactly 12 years after Charles I's severed head dropped into the straw, the remains of Cromwell and the regicides were dragged from their tombs and hanged from the common gallows at Tyburn before being buried in a deep pit. Over the next months, 11 other king killers were hanged, drawn and quartered. The old Cromwellians watched all this in tactful, furtive silence. They wondered just how reasonable this new regime might actually be. Killing the killjoys, though, Charles knew, would not damage his popularity. Given a free vote, the people would, especially after the major generals, vote for pleasure over piety. And leading the dance, of course, was Charles himself, constitutionally incapable of being so churlish as to spurn any woman generous enough to invite him into her bed. They all did. This was the golden age of ogling. If Puritan England had been governed by the ear, wide open to receive the word of God, the Restoration restored the sovereignty of the eye. Its ruling passion was scopophilia, the addiction of the gaze, whether eyeballing an outrageous wig, a plunging neckline, a louse caught in the lens of a microscope, or the constellations of the stars. Charles's boyish enthusiasm with the latest optical instrument suggested he might turn out to be a new kind of Stuart, one whose vision dwelled not in cloudy realms of absolutism, but which was precisely focused, concerned to observe reality, political as well as physical. He might in fact turn out to be that most unlikely thing, a reasonable Stuart king. This was a Stuart for whom the physical world was his alpha and omega, who was earthy in his realism. All too earthy, some thought, as they looked down in disgust at a theatre of indolence punctuated by debauchery that had become the court. They were not so worldly, not so rational, as to be free of the fear that someday there would be a reckoning. Someday soon, as it turned out. In the summer of 1664, a comet appeared in the skies over England. Its sallow tail could be seen with unprecedented clarity through the lens of the new telescopes owned, among others, by the king. But what most people saw was disaster in the offing. They had all read their almanacs. They knew that the apocalypse would be heralded by pestilence, fire, and war. A year later, thousands of bodies killed by bubonic plague were being tossed each week into the great pit of Aldgate. And there was nothing that science could do about it except count the dead with the care demanded by modern statistics.
My part of death, no one so true did share it. Come away, death.
1/6 of London's population perished. The infection ebbed with the onset of autumn, but the trepidation hung around. For the number of the beast was 666. And sure enough, up from the smoky regions of hell,